basically they are given a certain amount of money in a certain county, and they take that money and they divide it by the consumers, and that's how they figure out how many hours people are going to get. It's an assessment not based on need, but based on the amount of money that the Board of Supervisors in that county is allotted by the State Department of Social Services. So that threat was on the horizon, the threat of managed care. And it was real. There were several counties in the state at that point in time that had contracts with that company. So you have the cut of the hours, you have the managed care threat, and then the guys in the white horses rode up, including Mark and Hale and Ed and some folks from SEIU, and said, you know, what can we do to deal with this? And as Mark said, there was a promise of some federal funding that we knew the state could get. But the state at that point was opposed to doing it for a lot of reasons. We don't want to get federal funding. I don't think it's some stuff that I don't understand, but the state was refusing until that time to go after federal funding. So advocates from the California Senior Legislature, the Congress of California Seniors, SEIU, and the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, CFILC, many of you know who that is, got together and said, you know, what will change this dynamic here? What can we do to change this situation? And so what Mark was saying was, you've got workers here making terrible wages, $4.25 an hour in 1992. No health benefits of any kind, no benefits of any kind. And at the same time, you've got consumers who, if there was a problem that a consumer was having with their care, whether it was a late paycheck for their worker, whether it was they wanted to be reassessed, whether any problem that a consumer identified, the only way to get that problem addressed was to call their social worker. And they were on the mercy of that social worker, whether or not that person called them back. So there was no organized mechanism for consumers to have a voice. And so just think of that compared to today. We have so many different avenues that we can use to say this sucks, this is bad policy, you can't do this in my community. And that wasn't the case for in-home supportive services in 1991 and 1992. So with that backdrop of all these bad guys in a row, then what you have is the consumers got together with SEIU at that point in time, with those organizations that I mentioned, and they came up with this idea for a public authority. And what the idea was is, how can we create something that will be good for consumers, that is going to change the life of a consumer of in-home supportive services for the better, and it will change the life of a worker for the better. And they came up with this design. This is a legal framework. At the time in 1992, the words were just kind of like, what are you talking about? What is that? Okay? And people would glaze over with those words. But the reality is, it was a mechanism, it's a legal mechanism that gave workers a voice, gave consumers a voice, and brought them together and said to the state, go get funding, go get extra federal funding for in-home supportive services. And the other thing it did was it gave the counties an option. It said, you don't have to do this. In 1992, the first legislation wasn't mandated. No county had to do it. Counties could do it if they wanted to. And what that meant to us, the advocates, was we have to make the counties do it. And so the first counties to begin working on this, of course, were Alameda County with Mark, Sue Hodges, Hale, Ed Roberts. All the folks in Alameda County were absolutely amazing. San Francisco was another place where people started working very early on. We started working in Los Angeles to see if we could get the Board of Supervisors to consider this as an idea. And so what consumers did, got to it, sat at the table, and we did this in Alameda County. This is how I knew Mark. This is, you know, I sat in these meetings with Mark and the other consumers and other union people, meeting after meeting, trying to figure out what is it we want to be different in in-home supportive services in Alameda County. And over several months, we came up with a list of things that people wanted to be different in IHSS in Alameda County. And that then became what the advocates took to the Board of Supervisors in Alameda County, and they said, see, this is what we want. We want consumer power on the board. We want to create an employer of record for the workers. And we want to get this new funding. We want to get the personal care option so that we can improve this program for consumers and workers. And San Francisco did the same thing. And lo and behold, we had a couple of votes by a couple different boards of supervisors, Alameda and San Francisco initially. I think San Mateo was right next in line. And the movement, we all began to feel a feeling of a movement. Like, wow, okay, this is people coming together in different parts of the state to talk about the same problems and talk about the same issues and come up with solutions that they want for their community. So the problems that the consumers came up with and the workers came up with in Alameda County look a little different than the ones in San Francisco County. And they look a little different than the ones in Los Angeles County, because the intent of the public authority legislation initially, and actually even to this day, the intent of the public authority legislation is that it needs to address the needs of the county that it exists in, that it's been created for. So, to make a long story short, well, actually, there's a little glitch here on the horizon, because the big kahuna, as we all know, of course, is Los Angeles County. At that time, I think LA County had, I don't know, 80,000 consumers or something like that. Now I think we have 180,000 consumers. I'm not sure, but we've always been the biggest county in the state. So the big thing was to get the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors to say, yes, we want to do this. So at some point, we took direction from Alameda County that Mark's been talking about. I think Santa Clara County had voted and decided to create a public authority. San Francisco, San Mateo, Marin. But Los Angeles, finally, in 1996, I think, was the vote in Los Angeles County, where the Board of Supervisors finally said, all right, let's do it. And so by that time, the threat of the managed care, the threat of the contract mode, had sort of gone into the shadows. For a number of reasons. One is it's much more expensive than the independent provider mode. And I think the union that typically represented the managed care workers, the contract mode workers, was UDW. UDW began to see the writing on the wall, that they should support the independent provider mode. And until that time, they were actually extremely negative to the independent provider mode. So everybody moves, everybody changes a little bit over time, and so what happened, I think, on the state level was the unions, both UDW and SEIU, were extremely committed to this program and to improving it for consumers and workers. And the consumers in county after county after county were beginning to see that, in fact, there was nothing to be fearful of in terms of the union. Because initially, there was a tremendous amount of fear and suspicion about the unions because the unions had a lot of money. The IHSS consumers were not familiar with unions. They weren't necessarily verbal they couldn't articulate a lot of intricacies with union representatives or union workers, and so it was an amazing process to go from county to county to county and have conversations between workers and consumers, and then to watch a movement grow in which they both got together to figure out what they wanted IHSS to do in that county. Then, of course, you all know what happened in 1999. 1682 was passed, which mandated the public authorities. Okay, so the process, and this is an important thing to realize, because many of you, how many in this room are from mandated public authorities? Raise your hands real high so I can tell. Okay, so the rest of the counties are from public authorities where the Board of Supervisors was actually convinced by a coalition of workers and consumers to create a public authority. In the counties where you were mandated to form one, basically the people who decided, oftentimes the people who decided what the public authority would do, and many of you probably know that, is the county council would work with the social services department to figure out what that public authority would look like, how it would be structured, what department it would be in, and so on and so on. In other counties where the consumers and the workers got together to figure out what the structure would be and how it would be placed in the county government and stuff, that was led by the consumers, and the county council and the county department sort of had their hands off. So there's a fundamental difference in terms of how these things develop. And I think it's really important for all of us to realize that when we look at our organization and we see how some people understand this issue a little bit differently than other people in other counties. Part of the reason for that is the way their public authority was formed originally. So one of the things that you're looking at is the publication after I got involved in all this stuff. I was fairly fascinated by the process because this became a national model. The public authority became a national model for providing home and community-based services through the independent provider mode, okay? Home and community-based services are growing in this country, but what our take on home and community-based services is the independent provider mode. It's consumer direction. And we are definitely the leader of that movement in the entire country, and we've always been that way. I think Mark can tell you book and verse about the founding of IHSS to be a social model program, not a medical model program. So that preservation of the independent provider mode is just such a powerful motivator in this whole thing. So when states started looking at the program, what we offer is we offer a cheaper mode, okay? But for us, the cost at that point in time wasn't the big deal. The main point of this model